So if you're starting as a capital raiser, you're probably not doing this full time. So you're asking the question, what actually drives dollars? What actually gets more dollars in the door? What should I be focused on? Because there's so many things that you could be doing. And so in this video, I want to answer what are the exact levers that you should be focusing on that will have the greatest impact on your capital raising business. If you don't know who I am, my name is Ellis Hammond. I'm the Vice President of Capital at Aspen Funds, where we've raised over $250 million of retail investor capital up to this point. And we make these videos. I make these videos to really help other fund managers and capital raisers learn how to grow and scale their capital raising business and really see what's working here at Aspen Funds so that we can help you and potentially work together someday. So let's dive in here. So what should I focus on as a capital raiser if I don't have a lot of time and I want to say, hey, maybe you got a couple hours a day or a couple hours even a week. What should I do? And trust me, I know the tension, right? Because when I started in this, I was not full time. You know my story. I was actually serving as a college pastor when I got started as a capital raiser. And so I did not have a lot of time. And so what did I do? And I want to break this into three things, okay? There are three most important levers. Think of a lever as what are the things that really drive capital? What are the things that I should be spending my time on? The first one is this: growing or building your list. What do I mean? Typically an email list, right? Where you have people's contact information, their email and their phone number. And this is by far, even here at Aspen, it is a KPI for us, a key performance indicator of how fast or how quickly or by how much did we grow our email list every single day. We have an eye on it because it is that important. And so if you're starting out, one of the most important things I would be measuring, the activity I would be thinking about is list growth. And so how do you do that? Well, let me ask you this. The first question is, do you know who your dream investor is? Do you know what they want? Because that's going to be really, really important and will help you build your email list. And so for me, early on, I knew that my dream investor was typically a faith-driven investor and someone who was interested in passive investments and probably fairly new to the alternative investment game. And so they wanted to know, well, what questions should I ask before investing into an alternative investment? So I made a PDF, the top 45 things you should ask a real estate sponsor before you invest into a deal. And I just created a 5-page, maybe it was even less than that, 3 or 4-page checklist that they could download, that I could swap, right? I'm giving them value in exchange for their email address. And then I took that list and I went and posted that everywhere I had a following: LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. And then I would spend time trying to get on other people's stages. And so this is a great way that I grew my email list early on, is I would go on other people's podcast shows. And the title of the podcast was, the top 10 questions to ask as a passive investor. And I would give 3 or 4 of those on the show. And I would say, hey, if you want to have the other 7, go to my website /this and download my free PDF of the passive investor checklist. And this was a great way to give value in exchange for someone's contact information. And so that is a huge idea, is knowing what your ideal audience or your ideal avatar wants, and then building good resources, like resources that people would pay for in order to exchange their email and maybe even more importantly, exchange their phone number for that value. So asking the question or really taking the time to really know who your audience is, what is a pain point that they have, and then creating great resources to be able to exchange contact information for that. If you're starting out and you're trying to grow a list, you also might struggle because you don't have a lot of credibility, right? Like you might be saying, well, why would anybody want anything from me? Maybe I don't have a huge track record yet. I think one of the best things that you could do is you could borrow credibility from others. And the way that I did this early on, remember, when I started in this, no one knew who I was. I had no track record. I had really no experience, right? And so, remember, I was a college pastor, right, when I got going, when we started raising our first dollars. And so one of the things I would do is I would borrow other people's credibility, meaning I would go on LinkedIn. I remember searching in, this is a great tip. You can go on LinkedIn, you can search by hashtags, and I would find, I would search for topics I was interested in: passive investing, multifamily, real estate investing. And I would find those who did have credibility and who were, who had a following, and I would reach out to them and find ways to bring value. And one of those was say, hey, would you give me a quote for other investors, something that you've learned in your journey that I can share on my LinkedIn? So I was promoting them. But in return, what was happening is I was building my own credibility by borrowing from their track record. That's why the podcast idea, I love podcasting early on. That was one of the ways, I grew traction in this space is I started a podcast and I didn't know much. I was just the interviewer, right? Where I would bring other experienced people onto my show. And because I was sitting next to them and I was creating content beside them, I was able to borrow their credibility. And that was how I learned, but it's also how I built trust with an audience, because it wasn't just, hey, come learn from me and listen to me, right? And all that I know, which I didn't know jack squat. It was come learn from someone who's really experienced as I'm learning too. And this is an incredible way to borrow credibility. And then again, you're finding ways to build your audience. This is again, audience building, credibility building, and then you can exchange those resources for contact information to grow your list. One other thing I want to point out is we talk a lot about OPM, other people's money, but a massive way to grow your list, build your audience is OPA, other people's audiences. And again, I talked about the podcast idea. This was probably the biggest thing I did early on to grow my list, was going and leveraging other people's audiences. And so for me, you got to think about, well, where are the people, my ideal avatar, already gathering, right? So if, I was talking to someone yesterday, they spent 25 years as a first responder. There are other communities for first responders out there. There's already conferences. There's already people speaking to that audience. And so the hardest thing to do early on is go build an audience. So instead of spending a lot of time trying to build your own audience, you're just focused on list growth. So go to where the audience already is, and that's where people are already gathering. And so you could go on YouTube or go on, Apple Podcasts, or go to conferences where people are already spending their time and digesting content and find ways to get in front of them. And when you can learn how to leverage other people's audiences, the tip is find somewhere that you already have trust in. Again, if you're a first responder as trade, if you were a pastor by trade, maybe you're a sales leader by trade, go to those areas because you already have credibility there. You already have trust there. And so if you say, hey, I was a sales guy for 25 years and I had to work every single day at this active income, now I'm trading. I'm not trading my time for money. I'm investing in passive income things. Why don't you come invest with me? Download this, this resource. You instantly have credibility regardless of your real estate track record. And so learning how to, find other people's audiences and then getting, again, go serve as a guest, come up with a great topic, a great resource, a great story that you can offer that host, that conference leader, whoever it may be. Facebook groups are another one where you come in and provide real value to their audience. And this is how you can leverage their audience in order, again, to grow your list. That is point number one. Okay, the second thing, as you start to grow your list, the thing that I see that drives the needle the most in what we're doing, here at Aspen and before, is time on the phone with people. Meaning you have to turn that list into sales conversations. That's why it's really important. I would recommend if you're going to send a resource to someone, that you get their email and you get their phone number. Will it hurt conversion rate a little bit? Probably so, but at least now you have better leads if you're getting phone numbers. And so I would say another KPI, another thing to be measuring is how many sales calls are you having on a weekly basis. So if you come from a sales background, you already know how important this is. But if you don't, then this is the absolute bloodline of this business, right? Is that you need to be having one-on-one conversations with your investors. I could probably look at our database and know that the likeliness of someone investing with us without having a sales call with one of our investor relations reps is very, very low. But if I can get them on a phone call with someone, the odds are probably above 90%, right? And so this is so important that you're tracking how many conversations you're having on a daily and weekly basis with that list. One of the great ways to do this very easily is if someone goes and downloads your resources and you're going to send this to them by email. Well, then the follow-up email would be, hey, hope you enjoyed this resource. Schedule a call with me. I would love to learn more about your investment needs. And so creating automations that when someone grabs something else, they get the opportunity to schedule a call with you. The other thing you can do is, create text automations or just do the work of calling people directly and doing it that way. Every time we do a webinar and we get people to join our webinar, we grab their phone numbers. And then my team knows as soon as we do a webinar, the leads that we're calling the next day are the registrants or the people who showed up to that webinar, because we know that they are the most warm, the most interested. And so we're doing the outreach to get on the phone with them, because we know how important the phone is in building your capital raising business and bringing more investors to your deal. Okay, the last thing, we talked about growing your list. We talked about actually phone conversations with investors. The third thing is just time watched or time spent with you. The best analogy I can think of this is like, think about Kobe Bryant. He is beloved. He is beloved, right? I mean, people love Kobe Bryant. How many of those actually met Kobe Bryant? Very, very few. And so how did people fall in love with Kobe Bryant? They spent time watching him. They spent time watching him play. They watching his interviews, right? They fell in love with him through a screen. And the same thing goes for this business. People can, I don't necessarily fall in love with you, but learn to trust you by spending more time with you. And you don't have time to go and spend several hours with each individual. So you have to do that one to many. And the platform or the vehicle I love the most are two. One is webinars, and the second is podcast. I like webinars because you get to kind of do all of this in one. You get to build your list. You can push people to a call to action, which maybe is book a call with you. And third is they can spend time with you. And so we do webinars 3 or 4 times a month here at Aspen Funds. And we do a couple of those. We do live deal webinars, right, where we're actually pitching and promoting opportunities, but we do also educational webinars. And so I was teaching some guys yesterday, and their question was, well, how do we continue to follow up with investors who are kind of in that maybe or not sure yet stage? And webinars is a great way to do that, because it's a low pressure way to continue to get face time with them. And you'll be amazed if you commit to doing consistent educational webinars that add value to your audience, and you can get them to show up because you're doing things that are really interesting to them. This builds an amazing amounts of trust and will make your sales process so much easier. The other thing about having a podcast and building your own audience is that you start to realize, like, you never get on the phone with a stranger. And when someone gets on the phone with you and says, yeah, I've been listening to this, that you've been doing, I've been watching your YouTube channel, or I've been listening to your podcast, the conversation is totally different than someone who's never met you before, right? It just makes sense. And so this is a massive thing to be focused on as well. Again, this is priority. Build your list first. As you build your list, conversations with those investors. And then as you're starting to get momentum there and your list is growing, consider doing webinars. Consider maybe starting your own YouTube channel. Stuff where you can go one to many and people still begin to digest more of your content.